up, David?
Bro, who's streaming?
What's up, man?
Mark Jones. You got it.
You can learn about World War I. Yes, sir. Yeah. How you doing?
We're being invited. We got food. Come in, take a seat. Y'all ready? Smoke goes up. Y'all come on. Come to the water. Find a seat. Take a seat. Ain't coming! Ain't coming! Boom! Welcome to day 2 of World War I. Get out your notes. Get out your vocab. I hurt my ankle for you. I hope it was worth it.
You know that hurt.
Yeah. Hurt my ankle a little bit. I hope that was worth it. All right. Notes from yesterday. Now that I got your attention, let's see if I can keep it. Notes from yesterday. Your vocab from yesterday. Pull it out.
Oh, you got one.
Pull it out.
Oh,
This is day 2 of World War I. I would love to give all the time in the world to the military history, military strategy, but that's not what this class is about, okay? We're gonna get some big stuff. We're being invaded over here. Don't worry about it. We're being invaded.
What Miss Rosa at? She always late to class.
Here we go. Now, my world historians from last year, and I see a couple of you. You might have some repeat information today. You might see the same pictures, but remember, what does science say? How many times do you need to see something? Yeah. So if this is a repeat to you, you were in my class last year. That's fine. That's fine. That means you should be ahead of the game, and you should know a couple little extra stories that I might have to cut out and such. So. Day 2, we're talking about the battles and events of World War I, and we will actually get to a resolution, a wrap up of the war. We're gonna fight the whole war today. We're gonna fight the whole day 2 of 2. We're gonna fight the whole world war today. So let's remind ourselves as to how we got here in the first place. Remember our little one-act play yesterday? It doesn't matter if we just had fun with it, but we don't remember anything, then it didn't matter. So let's try to remember. All right. So our one-act play. Remind me of how we got here. JR, who was your character?
The dude that shot the lady in the guy.
Okay, the assassin, and your name is Gavrilo Princip. Now, that's not a name we got to super memorize, okay? Remember, I tell you to focus on the big ones, and I'll just tell you that's not one you got to memorize. Xavier, fashionably late. Xavier, who was your character yesterday? Remember? Yeah, he had an excellent feint. He was the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Don't put that on. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And what was your position? You remember that? He was the next in line to be the president of Austria-Hungary. Good. So that's step 1. The Serbian nationalist terrorist, JR, assassinated the Archduke and his wife. Well, that means Austria has to declare war on Serbia, right? We can't have people just assassinating our second in line. Well, that's the 2 little cousins scrapping with each other, right? Austria, Hungary, Serbia, scrap, 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 scrap. But it gets for real when Big Brother, Germany, Big Brother Germany comes in and supports Austria. Well, not to be outdone, Big Brother Russia says that it supports Serbia. Okay, so now we got the big brothers at Thanksgiving dinner scrapping with each other, right? They didn't start the fight, but they're here for it. And then Germany says, well, yeah, declare war on Russia. And while I'm at it, I declare war on France. And then from over at the dessert table, Thanksgiving dinner analogy, over at the dessert table, Great Britain says, yeah, well, I declare war on Germany too. And at that point, it was on, right? Domino, bam, 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 bam. All of a sudden, all of Europe is at war with each other for main long-term reasons and one immediate cause. So the immediate cause was the assassination. What were the 4 longer-term reasons? What's the M?
Imperialism.
The M.
Militarism.
Militarism, right? Wanting to have a big army. What was
Alliances.
the A? Alliances. Excellent. Somebody but JR. What was the I?
Imperialism.
Thank you, somebody but JR. Appreciate that. Hey, magic rain has fallen. That means you're doing good. Okay, so I gotta silence you. And then what was the N?
Nationalism.
Nationalism, which sometimes is patriotism, and that's good. Sometimes is extreme, and it says, I want to kill you because you're not a part of my country. That is bad. So good. M, A, I, and N, 4 main long-term reasons, 1 immediate cause. I feel like we're caught up and we can move on. Let's talk about World War I was a 2-front war. What is a front in warfare? What is the front line? What does that mean? Okay, it's the line where the fighting is happening. Now, just to make a modern example for you, I participated in the global war on terrorism. I was in Afghanistan. There was no front lines in Afghanistan.
Oh, you had buildings. You talking about the trench?
Yes, that's right, they are. It wasn't like, that's bad guy land, and this is definitely good guy land, and then just like, this is the line in front of us. In Afghanistan, it wasn't that way, because the enemy could be everywhere. There were no lines. In World War II, there are 2 distinct front lines. One is in the east, and one is in the west. So we're going to a pointer stick here. The Eastern Front pits Germany against Russia along their border. Germany and Russia fighting in the east. Talk a little bit about that. It's a little lesser known because it wasn't the trench warfare wasn't quite as grueling and as bloody, and Russia pieces out on the war about halfway through. I'll tell you about that in a second. But this is the Eastern Front. And then the very famous and very important world history and U.S. history, the Western Front, pits Germany against France. And JR is exactly right. What was all along the Western Front? Trenches. My world historians from last year, you may remember we transformed the class. We lived in the trenches for about 2 days, right? I rearranged the desks, and you guys were in the trenches for 2 days. JR, what was it like to be in the trenches?
I wasn't. I did get to watch the video.
Yeah. Who else I got? Christian. Zariah, what was it like to be in the trenches? Yeah, I made them sit. I made them sit down, not in seats. It was, did you have a lot of room or not a lot of room? Yeah, it was cramped. And then I even fed you, which in a school setting wasn't that big of a deal, but the food I gave you, what was it like?
No, but
Some of it was okay, some of it was.
What was it?
Last year we ate Army MREs, meals ready to eat, which MREs aren't that bad, but the point we're making was that their food was kind of nasty too, right? Their food wasn't very good. Not to mention, on the front line, did you catch the audio track as you walked in?
Yeah.
Field artillery, bombs, bullets, whistles, booms, all around you, all the time. Really played in your headspace, for sure. So a lot of young men were really damaged on the front lines if they survived at all. So this is life in the trenches, and this is what we're talking about on the Western Front. So this is, you see the border, Germany and France. There were trenches all along this border, a total of about 3,000 miles long. JR. What's that? JR makes the point that every last one of these trenches was dug by hand.
No way.
With their entrenching shovel. Yeah, hand shovel. Not excavators, not machinery, not earth moving technology. Hands. And guess what? That's what soldiers are good for. Soldiers are good for manual labor. So they all, I've dug in before. Yeah. I said this is 3,000 miles long along the map, but the way the trenches were built, they zigged, they zagged, they made sure that there were square corners so you couldn't just take a long shot down the long trench. There's about 25,000 miles worth of trenches dug. 3,000 miles if it was a straight line, but 25 plus thousand miles with all the zigs and all the zags and all the layers. So that is a lot of digging that happened in Europe in the early, the 19-teens, right? 1914 to 1918. So this is a Western Front, Germany and France. Now, I haven't gotten to your notes yet, but if you want to be jotting stuff down that sticks out to you, it's always a good idea, of course. You got the map in front of you. Maybe you want to draw a little line on the Western Front. Here is, I got a couple moving images, a couple of jiffies here. This is a rugged trench line. Okay, this is one of the lesser built up trenches. We're going to see how much time they actually spent building them up. So, great example of soldiers having to dig by hand here. Can you see that? It's almost like you were responsible for your little corner, right? You were responsible for your space on the line, and if it got mucky or muddy or wet, or we needed to dig deeper, we needed to dig a shelf, you were responsible for your own little area of the trench line. And the longer they stayed there, the more they got to build up. You can see now they got ladders. There's a little bunker, a little bit of a shelf, even a little bit of a walkway. So the more time they spent in the trenches, the more elaborate the trench lines got. And part of trench warfare, part of what makes it funny, is that these trenches, they never really moved. Ideally, how do you win a war? You go take over your enemy's capital. You take over the airport. You take over all the big cities. So that requires you to advance all the way through their country. In trench warfare, they really just kind of sat and looked at each other for 2-3 years. It was a little bit of a back and forth, but by and large, it was a standoff, it was a stalemate, and not much progress was made. Chloe, did I see a hand?
So then how do we lose 40,000?
Yeah.
So then how do we lose 40 million people?
So JR says, well, how did so many people die? Well, bombs and bullets accounted for some of that, right? There were many attempts to come out of the trenches, to go over the top, to try to fight each other. Men got cut down, chewed up by all the new technology, airplanes, machine guns, gas. And then in the trenches, disease, rats, infection, right? Bad, and the war medicine was improving a little bit, but it was still, it was still iffy, and there weren't a lot of clean field hospitals hanging around. So that's how so many people died. They are questions.
They stayed in the trenches, like you said. Why didn't everybody die?
Yeah. All right. Here's the deal, buddy. I can't get into all the tactics. I don't have time for that. You and I can have a little side conversation afterwards. Okay. A little bit more about the trenches. This is obviously a sketch. So, like I said, the first time I said it, maybe you thought they just dug a hole in the ground, right? Well, look at this sketch. The more time they had to build it, the better they could make their trenches. Now, the first thing you would want the trench to be taller than you, right? Because you want the bullets to whiz over your head while you are safe inside the trenches. So the first thing is that the trench had to be taller than a man, 6-7 feet tall. So how do I get up and actually shoot? Well, I got to have a little step. I'll click back a few here, and these guys are looking over the trenches, right? They're taller than the trench so that they can shoot. That's because there's a little bit of a step here. And then again, the more time you got to build, you got your little shelf, your elbow rest, a little bit of a backstop here with your sandbags. And then when it came time to nap, and yeah, you got a little rest. When you got time to rest, there's even a dugout. Trenches were nasty. If rain came down from the sky into your open hole, where do you think the rain went? Right to your feet. That's why this extra little cutout was important as well. Now, it didn't always work, and there's plenty of nasty trench conditions, but even still, they tried to irrigate the trenches as best they could. JK, question? Well, okay, so she says, could the other side just come on up and shoot you, right, while you're waiting? How far apart do you think these trenches were?
Miles apart.
Miles apart? A few football fields apart, so a couple 100 meters. Leon, you said something? Miles? They were within eyesight of each other. Okay, so not miles. But now, along the long stretch of trenches, along the 3,000 miles of trenches, they weren't identical, right? It wasn't this uniform distance. Some places, on average, it was between 50 and 100 meters. So half of a football field to a whole football field. I can definitely see you. If you were to pop your head up, maybe I'd take a quick little shot. I could probably shout at you, 50 to 100 meters. I could probably shouting distance. But I can't throw a grenade 100 yards, right? I can't reach out and stab you, not from 100 yards away. So 50 to 100 yards, that's kind of the average distance. Some were farther, but some were really in close. The closest trenches found with history and uncovering all these, about 7 meters apart. That's less than a first down, right? So maybe our team could make a 7-yard first down. I don't know about a 10-yard first down. That was funny. 7 yards. I could definitely shout for 7 yards. I could toss a hand grenade for 7 yards. I could even throw my knife, right? Throw like a spear. 7 yards, that's pretty close. But here's what's funny about the trench lines. Along a lot of the trenches, they kind of adopted this live and let live attitude. Like, hey, until our commanders order us to go over the top and start fighting, like, I'm not going to shoot at you. Let's just live and let live. A lot of times they'd have a little peace moment where they could come out and collect their dead. And then at nighttime, okay, this is before night vision goggles, they couldn't see each other in the dark. A lot of times at nighttime, the armies would come out and lay their barbed wire or lay their booby traps and really just mess up that no man's land in between. Really make it like hell. The no man's land a lot of times was referred to as very hell-like. So I've said a couple phrases already. The area between the trenches, my trench and the enemy trench, that's called no man's land. And a lot of times they called it that because no man could survive between no man's land. The machine guns, the technology we talked about yesterday, shoot everyone up. As soon as they came out of the trench lines, machine guns could chew them up. So, well, how then do you attack? How do you attack across the trench lines? That's called going over the top. If you have to come out of your trenches, you're going over the top. And a lot of times they'd be signaled with a whistle. We have some new technology like field telephones, but sometimes just your trusty old whistle is how they would stay coordinated. If one man went over the top by himself, right, sniper shot, he'd go down. But if 1,000 men went all at the same time, yeah, there's likelihood some of them would get shot down. But 1,000 men and then 2,000 men all going at the same time, that's how they tried to take over the enemy trenches. Well, like I said, even across 2.5, 3 years of fighting, very little changes were made. But this is actually a replica whistle of what they would have used. You heard me blow it when I came into class and flopped on the floor like this field artillery. This is it's not like your average referee's whistle. If you go to a basketball game, you get a referee blow his whistle, it's not going to sound like this. It's got a really unique sound, and it's made of the tin and then the shape of it. So I'm going to blow it one more time, and I want you to imagine this whistle, and then the sergeant says, "Follow me," and 1,000 people follow him trying to attack the enemy. So it'll be like this. Over the top, boys! Over the top! Follow me! That's how they would attack. Over the top, into no man's land. Again, guys, this is all bonus. A little bit. This is not going to be in your test. This is bonus because I think it sets the stage so that you can understand just how mucky World War I was. Here's another pretty good picture. It shows you what the trench lines were like. It wasn't just a line like, I don't know, just a straight line. there's a whole network of trenches. You have your front lines, and that's where the fighting would happen. People weren't on the front lines for the whole war. It's not like, oh, I got to go to the war, and I'm going to be on the front line for the next 2.5 years. People be on the front lines for about 3 to 5 days at a time, and then they would rotate out. Because, y'all, people could not handle the front lines for just over and over and over and over and over. About 3 to 5 days at a time is how long you'd be at the front lines, and trust me, that was long enough to still get messed up. The next level is called the support trench. The support trench is backed off a little bit from the front lines, but just still pretty close. And these would be the guys with the extra ammunition, or they might bring the food up, or if someone got hurt, they pulled the casualties back to the support trench. So a little bit moved away from the front lines, and they could do a little bit of extra support from the support trench. And then the reserve trench. Now, I'm not saying it's like a vacation, but if you were in the reserve trench, you were farthest away from the action. You were able to rest, recover a little bit, but you're also still available, right? If there's a big attack, they might say, bring up the reserves, and you have to rush to the front and be a part of the attack. So soldiers usually spend about a week on each level in rotation. So a week up front, a week in support, a week on reserves, and then back up to the front. Okay, that's usually how that happens. Now you can also see there's a lot of bends in the trenches. That's because if the trenches were just a straight line, I could shoot straight down the trenches. And if there's 25 people in front of me, the enemy could get everybody in a straight line. The trenches, they have a lot of bends in them. They're ziggy-zaggy, almost like Legos, if you will. And that's because that way the enemy would have to keep clearing the trenches, and they couldn't just get that straight shot. So that's why there's 30,000 miles of trenches, because they weren't cut in a straight line. They're really ziggy-zaggy. Final little thought here, you can even see there's even underground dugouts for commanders with their radios and with their maps and all that kind of stuff. So these trenches really became a small city, like an ecosystem unto themselves. And that's because people were in these trenches for so long, they built them up. They actually probably got attached to them a little bit. Like, hey, that's my trench line, and you can't have it. Here's a real photograph of trenches, and like I said, you can see how blocky they are. These are German trenches, and then a little less good are the British trenches. That's because the British, for most of the war, they were on the low ground. What happens to water in the low ground?
It washes down and it gets stuck in the low ground.
Water washes downhill, and it gets stuck in the low ground, and the British trenches were in the low ground. That means they had to deal with a lot of water and drainage and trench foot and all that kind of stuff. So generally speaking, it's not true of every person's situation, but the German trenches were better than the British trenches for that reason. Here's a couple of pictures of life in the trenches. You see these fellas are wearing the same kind of helmet I am, right? So that's a World War I helmet. They don't look like their feet are going to stay dry for very long. What if, and remember I said you're there for 3 to 5 days on the front lines? Anyone take a bath and your fingers get pruny in 14 minutes?
Yeah.
What do you think their feet are going to be like after 3 to 5 days?
Stay.
Right. Fella right there, he might be smiling for the camera. He's got a pretty sweet mustache, but his feet are going to be hurting as well. This is actually a hospital inside the trenches. So you can see how deep they are. Like I said, that when you want it to be taller than your head. The Red Cross here, that means he's a medic, and they're actually doing medical, they're helping these guys inside the trenches, right? They were their own city, hospital, security, kitchen, right? All that kind of stuff inside the trenches. We talked about feet. When you get your feet wet and nasty, it's called trench foot. And it was such a big deal. Have you ever had your feet checked? Maybe you went for a run, you play a long basketball game, softball game, and your feet get sweaty, grimy in that soccer game. Feet get sweaty and grimy. No, that's after 1 hour. Imagine being in the trenches for that long. So it was actually a really big problem. Soldiers straight up became a casualty because their feet would get dirty and infected. This is a doctor checking on his soldiers, right? A medic checking on the soldiers, making sure their feet are dry and good. Because if you don't take care of your feet, y'all, these guys aren't any wimp. These guys aren't weeds. Their feet are so hurt that they can't put any pressure on them to walk themselves to the support trenches or to the reserve trenches. They have to get a piggyback ride to do that. That's how bad trench foot was. Now I'm gonna show a picture that's kind of gnarly. You don't have to look at it if you don't want to. This is real deal trench foot. This is what would happen when you're in the trenches full of water for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days.
Please go with your foot picture.
Keep your feet dry, keep your feet clean, because that is literally rotting flesh. Right? That's not a boo-boo. That's not
What's
fruity
the
fingers.
Hey, Mr. Swanson, I need to see some color for checkout, please.
On his way.
Good.
That is rotting flesh. Here's another example. Same story, rotting flesh. So this is how the trench foot would take soldiers out of the fight, right? If your soldiers' feet look like that, your soldiers can't go over the top, can't attack the enemy. What do I got next? All right, just a couple more life in the trenches pictures, just trying to help you understand what the war was like. These guys are obviously German, based off of their uniform. You see the little pointy on their helmet, much like the helmet I have here. Xavier wore it very well yesterday. You can see that two of the guys, they are on duty. They got their guns facing outward. These guys, their guns are ready, but they got to catch some shut-eye. They got to sleep when they can. No, they lived like that. They lived in the trenches like that. They didn't have leisure time. They didn't have hangout time. Their life was in the trenches like that. Here's another picture. Machine guns. We talked about machine guns as a new technology. Another little moving picture here. You can see they even kind of built a floorboard. That's how long they've been in these trench lines. They had enough time to build a floorboard.
Where'd they get all the wood from?
Great question. I'm not sure about that. This is more of an action shot where they're actually going over the top. Let me see if I can wake somebody up. Over the top, over the top. So these guys are leaving the trench line, leaving safety, and they're going to go attack the enemy. Another example of kind of everybody being on security, 100% security. This guy's catching a nap where he can, all the sandbags built up. And guess what? The military still uses this kind of stuff today. Now, not a trench line like miles and miles of trenches, but you know me being in the military, I've dug these types of fighting holes, or these sleep holes. This guy, he dug a hole because if field artillery comes in, now if it lands on you, show's over, right? If the bomb lands on you, there's no chance. But if it lands near him, the way a bomb works is that it shoots shrapnel, hot metal, all directions. And if you are below the surface, like if you're below the earth, that hot metal won't cut through you because you are below the earth line. So that's what this type of a fighting position is supposed to be designed for. This next picture, I can feel that. I have lived this picture before. These guys, they didn't really dig into the earth. It's wet, it's nasty. Like I've slept in a wet poncho like that before and it's not easy to fall asleep. These guys are like, screw it, let's just build up. Same idea, let's just build up. So the U.S. military still digs fighting positions like this, even though it's not exactly trench lines, quite like we're talking about in World War I. One more example of a sleep hole, JR, those are Marines, hoorah. Even Marines need to sleep sometime. Can you believe that?
So what they do?
Oh, man, they just run
They just sleep in their sleep hole. And listen, guy, that's some good sleep. When you're tired and your commander finally says, take a break, dig a hole and take a break, you're willing to dig a hole and take a break. And there's some good sleeping. When you've earned a sleep like that, some good sleep.
Oh, good.
All right, that was an introduction to trench warfare. And I was just showing you some pictures that I've showed my world history class in the past. Now catch up with me on your notes, okay? That's where your guided notes pick back up. One of the big battles in the early war was the Battle of the Marne. September 1914 is an Allied victory. The Marne is actually a river, the name of a river. And remember, think about the Civil War, how many battles were named after rivers? That's because armies always want to control a river. For drinking water, or for supplies, lines of supply, lines of communication. Armies always want to control a river. Go ahead. And what was happening at the Battle of the Marne is that the French army was retreating back towards Paris. They're actually getting beat down here. They're getting beat back all the way towards Paris. And then it's known as what's called the Miracle at the Marne. They stopped, they rallied, and they beat back the Germans. They beat back the German army. So the Miracle at the Marne was a very costly Allied victory. The Allies did win, but it cost about 500,000 casualties, 500,000 people dead or injured. And it ends with kind of a standoff that leads to the trench warfare we just talked about, okay? At this point, at the Marne, that's when these trenches start to get dug and where we have the Western Front. Next battle you need to write down is the battle at Verdun. So it's also the first battle of the Marne, which means there's going to be a second battle of the Marne. I'll talk about that in a second. Next battle is the Battle of Verdun. It's actually a 9-month-long battle, so you might actually call it a siege, right? When armies are fighting with each other for 9 months, it's almost like a siege, not just a single battle. 9 months long. First time we see tanks used. We also see artillery and air power. So these the technologies we talked about yesterday, they all get used at Verdun. Here is, and then the result of these battles is that there's actually very little changes in the trench lines. Like I said, 100 meters moving either direction, but not wide-scale sweeping land exchange. Nobody's making a race towards the other country's capital, nothing like that. So in the end, it's almost like, man, what were we even doing? We didn't even gain any ground out of the whole thing. Got this much written down? Here's a quote for you, hopefully just to illustrate what life was like at Verdun. This young French lieutenant, he wrote this in his diary, his journal. So when something's written in a journal, what type of source is that?
First person.
First person, but what's the label?
Primary source.
Primary source, right? We can trust it because it was someone that was there, gives a first-hand perspective. This young man, he died. He died by artillery eventually, but he was alive to write this in his diary. He wrote, "Humanity is mad. It must be mad to do what it is doing. What a massacre. What scenes of horror and carnage. I cannot find words to translate my impressions. Hell cannot be so terrible. Men are mad." What did General William Tecumseh Sherman say about war? War is hell. And this lieutenant, he writes, hell cannot be this terrible. Men are mad. Why are we doing this to each other? What motivates human beings to fight each other like this? That was his impression. So that is what he was living through in the trenches. Maybe that brings it alive for you just a little bit here. Here's a real picture of a trench at Verdun, the battle we just talked about. So this photograph was taken in the year 2009. That's obviously modern. And what I think you need to take out of that, it's cool for it to be a historic battlefield. It's cool for historians, people like me, to go visit these battlefields. But what you should take out of this is that it scarred the landscape. When they dug these trenches, they altered the earth by digging into it and in a way that it's still there to this day. So unfortunately, war literally scarred the landscape of the earth, and it's still there to this day.
So when they dug it, the trees was right there in the same place?
What's that?
Were the trees in the same place where it does?
Vegetation grows up around it. I can't speak for the age of that tree, but the point is the trench is still there. Trench is still there. Good question on the trees, Nevaeh. If it was 80 years later, the tree's probably new. Here's another one, a German trench and bunker. Remember I said the German trenches were usually a little bit more built up. Here's another battle for you, the Battle of the Somme. That's a French word, Somme. At the Somme, it was one of the worst battles on the Western Front. There were over 1 million casualties, and most of these casualties were in no man's land. The space between the trenches, cut down by the machine guns, slaughtered by the field artillery, and the result, again, it was several months long, and the result is not much change in the trench line. Here is another quote from someone who was there. He says, "Somme, the whole history of the world cannot contain a more ghastly word." So the word of the town has now become synonymous with hell itself for the people who were there. So a couple of big battles on the Western Front, but remember, it is a two-front war. If the main front we just talked about was called the Western Front, what was the other front called? Thank you, the Eastern Front. And like I said, what two countries found themselves fighting on the Eastern Front? Russia and Germany. So Germany's busy. Germany is squeezed in the middle here, and they're taking it from the west and the east. And they're, to that point, they're kind of holding their own as spread thin as they are. Well, on the Eastern Front, a big battle that you need to know that you're going to write down is the Battle of Tannenberg, and it is a major defeat for Russia. All right, I don't know what your impression is. Russia's a big country. It's powerful. It should be better than Germany, whatever. Well, at Tannenberg, Russia is defeated. Russia suffers very high casualties. And the most important part about the Battle of Tannenberg is that it leads to the Russians quitting the war. The Russian public is so fed up with the war at this point that it leads to a middle class and even a peasant revolt, which becomes called the Revolution of 1917. And since the Russians are fighting each other at home, they can't possibly continue fighting on the Eastern Front. And so this revolution of 1917 forces Russia to leave the war. Basically, public demand said, get us out of this war. We don't belong here, right? We didn't assassinate anyone. This is European problems, and we didn't start it, so why are we involved in it? Let's leave the war. And that's what they do. Basically, at that point, they say, hey, Germany, we're going to leave. This line, this is the line, okay? Don't attack us. We're not going to attack you anymore. The land that we exchanged, like, it's good. It is what it is. We're leaving. We out. That's what happened. Germany was glad to have that happen because they could leave the Eastern Front and give all their efforts to the Western Front. And they would need the ability to do that because America's about to enter the war. I'll tell you about that here in just a second. Now, I'm not going to hang out on the Russian Revolution too long, but just it is on your notes, and you guys freak out when I skip a section that's on your notes. So go ahead and jot this down. Vladimir Lenin takes control of Russia. Russia becomes communist under his leadership. They overthrow the current president, and now Russia is led by the communists and Vladimir Lenin. And this is important because it sets Vladimir Lenin is going to be in leadership all the way up to World War II. So we are walking ourselves towards World War II, and that's why the Russian Revolution is kind of important. So not too much more to say about that, other than it's what got Russia out of the war. I'm going to go ahead and pause there. I think it's a good little pause for us to go to the bathroom. So as you have that written down, go ahead and you can step out and use the restroom. When we come back, we'll just drive all the way to the finish, okay? So you finish the Russian Revolution, pause for the cause. We can take the short walk so we can get back in and finish the war.
Well, what's that short walk?
Can we take the long walk?
Nope, short walk, we can get back and finish the war.
I want
No
to
walk, short walk or no walk?
I'm gonna buy a drink.
Short walk or no walk?
I'm gonna buy a drink.
You can go to the hurry up. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Hurry, hurry, hurry.
What's the middle of October?
The middle of October?
You recording it?
I am.
Why?
I can show you the graph. I can show you the graph. What's the
Just keep doing what you do. Find the name space to try to find the right.
I be doing it, but it just, my name.
But when we do get your name on there, like that one of your first things that you do. When you first get your paper, just go ahead and write your name on there.
Me have my way, have it.
And I'm telling you, that's why I say. Alright. So I've got that. You couldn't find the other?
No, this I know I turned it in. I just don't remember if I had an email.
I don't know, Jose, it's not in that box. My only other suggestion, you started off strong, and I'm not sure what happened. I don't know if you lost focus.
Sometimes I just forget my name on it, turn it in, or sometimes
So just double check from now on, and let's make sure, you don't have a lot of zeros, but the zeros do hurt. The
I
ones
know.
you have,
I
'cause
heard
those
it
are
drop my
fours.
grades pretty much. Yeah, it's all this.
Why is this live?
So you can bring it up. I know you can.
I wanna try to, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's like I have, like, this is not the only class, but I know I have to turn this in, but other classes where I turn my work in, I have my name on it, still end up being a 0. My first block is like literally nuts. I
Is that
turned,
math?
huh?
Is that math?
Answer. Like, there's one point where I turned my work in, he said I didn't turn it in. And I recall turning it in.
Well, like I say, I'll double check for the reconstruction. We have that piece there. And since your name is on it, we can give credit where credit's due now. I'll go do that. But just when we're taking up on Fridays, just make sure. If you think you've turned it in, come look through the file and see if your name's in it anywhere. Okay, just double check behind.
Can you see what this looks like?
If I can find a copy of it, I do not mind showing you at all.
Now you said you're gonna kiss me.
Find your seat, take a seat. All right, phones up, back to me, my turn. Got a really important chunk ahead of us, that's why I gave you the break, so that we could just shake up your thought process a little bit, get you refocused mentally.
Hey, Mr. Budget. I didn't get you yesterday. Can you come in? Yes, ma'am. That's like if you want.
Chloe, bring your notes with you.
Give me 1 second.
Boy, David, stay on.
That's what it was.
David.
I think I just.
Say it for in the video. Did you say say it? That's what I heard you in the video. Miss Roger, I'm gonna see her. I need that the vocabulary
From yesterday?
Okay.
I mean, I don't have anything filled in on mine, is that fair? You just made it all wet, so I got to respond. This happens to be yours.
It's pretty good at whatever it's over.
All right, check it out. We took a break. I let y'all go to the vending machine. Best thing you can do to pay me back for my graciousness is pay attention. Those of you that just getting here, I said we got a real important section coming up, which is why I let you take the break now. Took a break so that we can pay attention to this really important section. The important section is America joins the war. Well, hey, welcome to the party, America. It's only been going on for 2.5 years so far. So nice of you to finally join us. What took America so long to join the war? What do you think?
A cause.
We just got out of the war.
We just got out of a war. Okay, we're dealing with Spanish-American War a little bit.
We don't wanna get into the war.
What type of an attitude, JR? Say it again.
We don't wanna get into it.
We don't want to get into wars. What's that attitude called?
Neutrality.
Neutrality and isolationist. Very good. Most of America is isolationist. Remember, George Washington said, be very careful about getting involved in foreign entanglements, which means stay neutral, right? So we have followed George Washington's advice pretty well. There's been a couple, right? Spanish American, Mexican American, whatever. But by and large, we have followed George Washington's advice about making sure America comes first. Well, not just the president, but also the American public is very isolationist at this point in history. The president is a man named Woodrow Wilson. Okay, we've gone past Theodore Roosevelt, the man with the teddy bear, and now we're talking about Woodrow Wilson. And Wilson actually campaigned for president in the year 1916 on the idea that he has kept America out of war. He said, hey, vote for me. I have kept us out of that whole European conflict thing, and I will continue to keep us out of war if you vote for me. The idea was, this doesn't involve us. The whole assassination was not related to America. Everyone fighting with each other, their militarism, their nationalism, their imperialism, it does not involve us. There is an ocean between us and them. There is no reason for us to get involved. Until, there's always an until, isn't there? Until two big things happen that are going to lead America to get involved in the war. The first is the sinking of the cruise liner Lusitania. Lusitania. Lusitania is a luxury cruise liner. Okay, it is not a cargo ship. It is not a military ship. It is like Carnival, Destiny of the Seas,
So
or
Disney cruise ship.
Disney Cruise Ship, The Fantasy, or Royal Caribbean, Beacon of the Seas, or whatever these cruise ships are named,
So
right?
you could visibly tell it wasn't.
It was a fancy cruise ship. Now, JR says you could visibly tell it was a cruise ship. The Germans are going to think just like JR. The Germans are going to say, I don't care what this ship looks like. That thing is carrying war cargo. That thing is carrying ammunition and war supplies, and we're going to sink it. Okay? So the Germans believe they have the right to do that because they're in wartime conditions. Well, the problem is that the sinking of this ship kills 1,000 people, and about 130 of them are Americans. And we're not talking, I hate to say average Americans, but we are talking wealthy Americans, okay, well-to-do. Members of the Vanderbilt family. Remember Vanderbilt?
Yeah.
So even money couldn't insulate you, couldn't protect you from getting involved in the war. Because wealthy people who were on the ship died when it sunk. The Lusitania kind of becomes a rally cry. Remember the Lusitania. Just like, what are some other remembers we
Remember
remember?
9/11.
Remember 9/11, okay. Remember the Alamo. Remember the other ship that got us involved one time? Spanish American. Remember the Maine. It just goes to show you that we'll grab on to anything we can as a rally cry. Now, the sinking of the Lusitania doesn't get us involved in the war immediately. Something else has to happen as well. Here's a bit of a picture for you. It shows that, even look at the way this is sketched. This German submarine is lurking in the shadows. It's clearly the bad guy. This luxury cruise liner is just minding its own business and it gets torpedoed. What else I got here? Pretty good infographic on the Lusitania. I'm not going to hang out on it too long, but you can see there were 1,900 people on board. 1,200 of them drowned. Okay, so there were survivors, and 128 of them were from America. They were Americans. So the sinking of the Lusitania, Germany declares that it was involved in unrestricted submarine warfare. Unrestricted submarine warfare. That's a very important term. It's on your guided notes,
Kind of
and
like
it is also on your vocab.
under.
So remember, Germany calls these boats U-boats. What does the U stand for? Underwater. We would know it as, you guys would use the phrase submarines. They are saying that, hey, if it's in these waters, I'm shooting at it. I don't care that it's a luxury cruise liner. It could be used to carry ammunition. It could be used to carry war materials. We will shoot at every boat in these waters. Well, that doesn't sit very well with the Americans, who now have their commerce affected. Remember, this thing didn't involve us until it did. Now, all of a sudden, our economy is involved, and our trade is involved, our trade partners is involved. This kills 1,000 people, 130 Americans. So President Wilson says Germany must apologize and must stop targeting peaceful ships. If Germany does this, America will stay neutral. You think Germany wanted that?
No.
You don't think Germany wanted America to stay neutral? Germany definitely wants America to stay neutral, okay? So Germany agrees to this apology, and they offer an apology. They back off on the unrestricted submarine warfare, and in return, America doesn't quite yet enter the war. Germany does not want to play with Uncle Sam, so Germany is willing to do this to keep America out of the war.
So we're big.
Well, I said there were two big events. The other big event is the event known as the major event is the Zimmermann Telegraph. It was a secret message from Germany to Mexico. Mexico, we have not talked about Mexico in this world war yet. Does anybody know Mexico's role in the war?
Yeah.
What was Mexico's role in the war?
Now.
Well, in the end, Mexico does not get involved. But Germany tries to get Mexico to invade America from the south. And they send this coded message, and it's all numbers. I'm going to show it to you just on the very next picture. It's all numbers. I couldn't read it, right? I got no chance at reading this thing. But a group of very smart mathematicians, oh, you mean if you paid attention in math class, you have a chance to help your country? All y'all are like, math don't matter to me. I'm never going to use this in the real world. A group of very intelligent mathematicians cracked the code, and they were able to see what it said. And it says that if Mexico declares war on America, when we win the war, and it's Germany talking, when we win the war, we will give New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas back to you guys, back to Mexico. So they're trying to get Mexico involved in the war, and they're promising to return the land that the U.S. took about 100 years earlier. You see how all of history matters? That's called the Mexican cessation. That's a vocab word for you. And now Germany is using that period of history to try to get Mexico involved in the World War. Well, this causes outrage in America, and ultimately it's going to get America involved in the war. Here's the actual telegram. And if you look really close, you can see it's just a bunch of numbers, right? I got no chance at deciphering this thing. I'm not smart enough to. But look at this. History lets us look at these primary sources. You can see that there is a number associated right here and then connected to a word. And I'll just help you. I'll summarize this for you. We make Mexico a proposal of an alliance on the following basis. We will make war together and we will make peace together, under the understanding that on our part, Mexico is to reconquer lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. So everything I just said to you, if you attack the United States from the south, when we win this war, we will give that land back to you. They tried to appeal to Mexico's ego, but history tells us Mexico did not take the bait. Mexico does not get involved in this deal. Why do you think Germany would have made this proposal? What do they gain by Mexico attacking the United States from the south?
Help.
Help? What kind of help? Just saying words. The United States would be distracted with this Mexican invasion. If they had to fight at their southern border, they wouldn't have time to get involved in Europe. That's why they wanted Mexico to attack from the south. Here's a picture here. It shows how the German hand and the German knife is going to cut off Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas and give it back to Mexico. And then it's even offering Japan to California, at least in this political cartoon. Well, this telegram goes public. And as soon as the American public hears about it, they are ready for war. Okay, we were isolationists. We were happy to stay out of the war. Now we're ready to get involved in the war because Germany has just gone too far. If you were the president, what would you do at this time? If you're President Wilson, what would you do? Declare war? Why? Yeah, what? You thought I was just gonna let you leave it there? JR, what would you do?
I mean, like, I would declare war, but I would think twice about it too. He just
Oh.
came out of the war. His whole political campaign was about keeping peace.
His campaign promise was that I didn't get involved in the war and I'm going to stay out of the war. That's a great thought, JR. Here's what Wilson says. He says the world must be made safe for democracy. Its peace must be planted on tested foundations of political liberty. He's going the democracy route. We're going to get involved in this war because we've got to protect democracy at home and abroad. This is Wilson asking Congress for a declaration of war. And Congress officially declares war on Germany in April of 1917. So it is because of the Zimmerman telegraph that America gets involved in World War I. If you look at the date, you see that the war has been going on for 2.5 years. America is really late to this party, but America getting involved is going to finally bring the war to a conclusion. There's a newspaper heading, "The nation is now at war." So America mobilizes for war. We don't have an army that's quite ready to go. It's not big enough. We don't have enough equipment. So we have to have a draft to build our army. Here's a draft card. Remember, the draft is mandatory military service. You get drafted into the army. Look at the lower left-hand corner. What do you see on this draft card? Just describe. You can't read the words. Just describe what you see. What's that? No, left-hand side. Lower left-hand side. Little cutoff, little triangle cutoff. Let me pull it up bigger for you. It says, if person is of African descent, cut off this corner. Why would the draft card say that? Person is an African descent.
Oh, because of the Jim Crow laws.
Jim Crow laws, okay. So if they cut off the corner of the draft card, what would it help them do?
They would know which it was African.
Okay, African or white. And what's the S word for that?
Segregation.
Segregation. The military is still unfortunately segregated. So you're gonna have white units and black units.
But that's.
And it just goes to show you that unfortunately, it's really sad, part of our country's history, unfortunately, there was still segregation to this level. That, this corner of this draft card was supposed to be removed for Africans. Water fountains, restaurants, movie theaters, buses. There's not even integration in the military yet.
So they still have to go,
it's still separate.
but
They still have to go, but you fight in your own unit. Is that what you're about to say?
So they're still separate today from white.
No, absolutely not today. Very fortunately, good things finally came about in our country, but I'm just showing you a sad part of our country's history. Even as recent as 1914, Africans and people of color were experiencing this type of discrimination. So I'm sharing with you your country's history so that if you see this ever happen again in the current, you won't stand for it. If you ever see a corner that says tear this off, if you are fill in the blank, don't stand for it. We've already come past that. Let's not go back to it. This is kind of a fun little side note. This won't be on the test. I'm just showing you. This is called the Slacker Patrol. I'm gonna start having a Slacker Patrol for some of y'all in the hallway. Slacker Patrol was this truck that would go out and round up people who hadn't registered for the draft. Like, hey, Jimbo, you registered for the draft yet? No? Come on, get on the wagon, boy. We're gonna go register for the draft. So these soldiers, these are guys in uniform, they would round up people who hadn't registered for the draft. They'd take them straight to the registration building and they'd have to register for the draft. Slacker Patrol. I'm gonna call you a slacker and I'm gonna start patrolling you, JR. All right, moving on. Let me get to the end here, okay? America enters the war. Americans are called doughboys because they are fresh-faced. It's almost a derogatory term, like, hey, fresh body, welcome to the war. Glad you finally got here.
I like fresh meats.
Fresh meat a little bit, yeah, sure. So 2.8 million doughboys are drafted into the armed forces. These fresh American troops finally turned the tide of the war for the Allies. They helped lead the final Allied offensive into the summer of 1918. So once America got into the war, we helped tidy it up pretty quick. The Americans really made the difference, and in the end, maybe that's a good thing because we saved a long war from happening where more people would die and more things would be broken and all that kind of stuff. Once Americans started arriving in Europe, they arrived at about 10,000 people per day. So that's how you get 2.8 million soldiers into the country, about 10,000 people per day. Pretty significant. Give you a chance to copy this because this comes on your guided notes. You good on this slide? America enters the war.
Let's go to the 14 point.
Jackie said, move along. Yes.
Daddy. Y'all is so weird. I got
Where am I at? Okay, remember all the battles? Remember I said that there was a second Battle of the Marne? There's a second Battle of the Marne. It was an Allied victory. And from this second Battle of the Marne, this is not on your notes. I'm bringing you a little Georgia history. The 3rd Infantry Division, which is out of Fort Stewart, Georgia. Okay, so your homegrown division. This is the unit I was in when I was in Georgia and I met my wife. And big reason that we came back here today as it is, right? 3rd Infantry Division gets known as the Rock of the Marne because they held their position like a rock. Like Jackson's men stood like stone walls. Stonewall Jackson. That's how nicknames happen, right? So Rock of the Marne, 3rd ID, happens from the second Battle of the Marne after America enters the war. All right, Wilson's 14-point plan. Let's bring the war to a close. What do you say? Wilson gets involved in the war because he thinks that he can bring us to world peace. You remember, what was one of the nicknames for this war? The war to, say it louder? the war to end all wars. We really thought that this was going to be the last war in all of human history. Now, it wasn't. We know that now. But Wilson thought, I got a chance to bring the world to world peace. And I got 14 ways to do it. I got 14 points to bring out world peace. Wilson's plan was for a long-lasting peace. This is on your notes. But, there's always a but, my friends, but it conflicted with Europeans' desire to punish Germany. Remember, we're hanging out for most of the war. We're not getting beat on. The war's not in our homeland. We got a whole ocean between us. But in Europe, they punching each other in their backyards. They're scrapping on their own turf. And they are ready to punish Germany. So they're not interested in a nice little peace plan. They want to make sure Germany gets punished. And this is where Wilson's 14 points are going to fall apart a little bit, because the Allies, Italy, Britain, France, they want to make sure that Germany gets punished. And that's ultimately what we're going to see in the peace treaty. Y'all got this written down yet? Conflicts with Europeans' desire to punish Germany. This is a picture called the Big Four, which is UK, Italy, and France. And, I'm not sure that's exactly what they're saying, but the idea is that they all got together and they wanted to punish Germany for the war, not just look for world peace. All right, here's the original document of Wilson's 14 points. So I'm going to give you a second just to read that. You reading it? Of course you're not reading it. Let me tell you what it says. The pay is like I was. Let me summarize it for you. Okay, even this much is probably a little too much to read. Big ideas were the ocean is open to everybody for free trade. Okay, free trade on the seas. Free trade conditions, equal trade conditions for all countries. So you see the economic emphasis here. Also, every country has the right to determine for themselves if they want to be a free country or if they want to fall under another country. So Germany, you can't say these are my colonies. They get to decide for themselves. And when they reestablish boundaries of a lot of these Baltic state countries, there's a big difference in who belonged to what empire. Okay, in fact, the empire's imperialism kind of went away because of this idea. It's called self-determination. That's why it says I am determined. And then finally, I'm summarizing this for you. A lot of these are about borders. That's why they all kind of merge together. Finally, Wilson came up with an idea for something called the League of Nations. That sounds like a nice, fluffy idea where we're all just like in a league together and we agree and things are good. That was his idea for world peace, this thing called the League of Nations. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it in a second as well. This all leads to an armistice. There had been fighting all the way up to this point. Bang, bang, shoot, shoot. They've been fighting all the way up to this point until it is agreed. Whew, that echoes in my ears. Until it was agreed on the day where they would lay their weapons down. Now, an armistice is not a peace treaty, but it was a laying down of their arms. That's why the picture says we lay down our arms. Do you know what day was set for the armistice? I bet you do. You just don't realize it. July 4th is a good guess, not true.
Labor Day.
They agreed for the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month for the guns to go silent. Nevaeh says, I taught you that last year. That's November 11th. What is November 11th in America? No, yeah, 11/11. Huh? Not 9/11. November 11th is Veterans Day. Veterans Day. So Veterans Day is related to the end of World War I. We're not going to watch this video right now, but this is an awesome little primary source footage of when the guns go silent. Guys, they shot at each other up until that 11th hour. It's like they all had their stopwatches out, and they're like, hey, 10:59, one more minute, bang, bang, bang. And then at 11 o'clock, it goes in silent. And this forever. The war ends. So at first, it was a laying down of the arms. And if they didn't sort out a peace treaty, theoretically, they could have started the war again. But in the end, they laid down their arms, and the arms stayed laid down. This leads to the Treaty of Versailles. And this is going to be the actual peace treaty, okay? Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1914. which is exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So our one-act play from yesterday, JR as the assassin, Zay as the leading man. The war ends exactly 5 years after the event that started it. That's kind of poetic, right? The big three that were involved in it were the UK, US, and France. Who doesn't get a seat at the table? Germany, right? Even though they're getting beat on and all the consequences are coming down their way, they don't get to have a part of the conversation because, quite frankly, they don't deserve to. Here's a big take. The Treaty of Versailles does not very much resemble Wilson's 14 points. He has these 14 points for world peace. If they listen to me, we'll have world peace. Treaty of Versailles. What do the Europeans want? No, what do the Europeans want to do to Germany?
Oh, punishment.
Punish them. Yeah, so this is what the Treaty of Versailles actually starts to look like. Here, this is on your notes. Give you a chance to write it verbatim. Germany was forced to accept full responsibility for the war. Germany loses all of its territories. Germany must repay financially, called reparation payments to the Allies. They have to pay for all the damage they caused. And Germany must only have a very limited military. They can only have 100,000 soldiers in their military going into the future. So write this down verbatim, and then I'm going to give you a real cute acronym that's going to help you never forget it. I promise. My acronyms are the cutest.
So far, I see this 59 cent, not 50. All these should be together. One kind of so far, I see this 50 cent.
You got this yet? All right, copy it the way it is in your notes, and then to the side, I want you to write my cute acronym. JK, it's the cutest. It's the cutest. All right, here's my acronym. I wonder if any of you have ever been called a brat. Anyone ever been called a brat? Or maybe you eat a bratwurst. B-R-A-T, here's what it stands for. B, Germany accepts blame for the war.
Where are we supposed to fit this?
R, there's space, or the whole backside, or you got those notes to the bottom. R, Germany is forced to pay reparations to the Allies. That's financial. Maybe you want to put a dollar sign next to that. A, Germany has a limited army, less than 100,000 troops. T, Germany loses territory. Blame, reparations, limited army, loses territory. Blame, reparations, limited army, loses territory. B-R-A-T. Guys, this is a great example of how I'm not looking for you to memorize facts, right? These flashcards are awesome. They're helping you out with vocabulary, but I don't care that you memorize them. I care that you have the big idea and can apply it, okay? So if B-R-A-T helps you along the way and helps you break down a lengthier question and apply it and get the right answer, that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. All right, I think you're at the point where, yes, I want you to take mandate system and just put an X through it. That's not a chunk we're going to go over. JK's like, yeah, I can do that. Mandate system, just put an X through it, not something we're going over. Give me a few minutes here. I'm going to tidy up a few thoughts. We're well ahead of our bell schedule, so don't race to
But we got cards.
yeah, don't race to be mentally done because we're going to start introducing some terms and flashcards to you, okay? All right, couple final thoughts here. Couple final thoughts. And hey, by all means, keep jotting stuff down, right? I'm not one that just because it's not in your guided notes doesn't mean it's not worth writing down. The German people consider this agreement to be Diktat. Diktat is a very derogatory term meaning a dictated peace.
Oh.
Let me ask you this. JK, can I make you do something? Can I say, students, sit down and be quiet? I might be able to make you do it, but if you don't want to, is it going to stick? No. The German public was humiliated by this peace treaty. The German public was devastated by the terms of surrender here, okay? And it really hit their psychology. It hit their hearts. They were humiliated on the world stage. They call it dictated peace, meaning not a real peace, but a peace that was given to us. They also call it a stab in the back. And they called their leaders who came up with the agreement, they called them the November criminals. It's almost like saying they're not really our president. We don't really believe they are the November criminals, because the agreement was it was negotiated in November. So all that to say, the German public is not on board, and what that means is that we are just a few steps away from them wanting to regain their honor by going to another war, which we are going to call World War II. The Treaty of Versailles is a failed treaty because it set the conditions for World War II. It didn't bring about peace, long-lasting peace. It really just set the world up for another confrontation. So that's why it's a failed treaty. League of Nations, remember Wilson's big idea for all of us to be on the same team? League of Nations, it existed for about 25 years, 1919 to 1946. Guess who was never part of the League of Nations? United States of America. Wilson's idea was never ratified by the Senate. A lot of countries did join. A lot of countries joined, but then some countries left. They're like, this thing's not working out. It's not what we thought it was. So the League of Nations only has a 26-year lifespan. Doesn't work out very well. And the United States itself, ourselves, we never joined the League of Nations. It's as if to say, this is a political cartoon that you might have to dissect on the test someday, who knows. It's as if to say Uncle Sam was handcuffed by the League of Nations. Wilson wanted to join it. It was his own idea, but the Senate and other outside conditions just never allowed for it to really be a good idea and not something that America actually joined. So the League of Nations was kind of a bust. What do we have today? That's kind of the same idea. Anybody? The United Nations is an organization where most of the world belongs to the United Nations.
Yes.
So League of Nations was a bust, but the United Nations, and this is actually the UN flag right here, this blue one that I'm kind of circling, the blue one right there with the world in the middle, that's called the UN flag, the United Nations flag right there. Anyhow, we do have the United Nations today. Last thought, last slide, we'll take a little brain break and play some flashcards. Big summary, the lasting effects of the war. Political, social, and economic. There's effects in all three of these areas. The U.S. emerges as a world power. We have arrived, we're on the world stage, we won the war, the U.S. has arrived as a world power. Germany is crushed by the treaty. The German spirit is deflated, they're crying. Very high casualty rate, civilian casualties 8 million, military casualties 10 million. I need to correct one thing I said yesterday. I think yesterday I said 40 million dead. I should have said 40 million casualties, which means dead and injured. 18 million dead, 40 million altogether casualties. So still a huge worldwide impact. How many in the Civil War? Starts with a 6.
600 now.
620,000, right? Now we're talking 40 million casualties, 18 million dead. Big war. What else? And then $300 billion in those dollars, $4.3 trillion, trillion with a T, if you were to adjust that for today. So big worldwide impact. Couple just fun pictures to round it out, okay? Just free yourself from your notes. Just take a look at these pictures. These are truly my last thoughts before we get to the notes, or excuse me, before we get to the cards. Human ingenuity was on the rise because of the war. So take a look at this picture. This young man had his nose blown off. His nose is part of his mouth, but the prosthetic, medical advances in prosthetics, arms, legs, facial features, allows him to live a normal life. So pretty cool that war is bad, but sometimes innovation comes out of war, and when it's able to help people like that, it's a good thing. The role of women was increased, right? When men went to the battlefield, women went to the factories, women went to the farm. We are about to see women allowed to do what? Vote. Vote. We're about to see women get the right to vote, and it starts with women proving themselves in the war. Should have happened a lot earlier, right? I'll be the first to say that. but because of World War I, we're gonna see women get the right to vote. We'll talk about that later this week.
In
That's the one.
Let me finish. If you're ever interested in really seeing a cool museum, Kansas City, Kansas is home to the National World War I Museum and Memorial. The memorial itself is this large stone pillar. It's called an obelisk, but the museum is awesome. When I taught cadets in Oklahoma, I was able to go visit it, and these are my first students. I taught them how to do Army. I kicked them out into the Army.